Hello, Nick Tyrone, neoliberal centrist dad, back with you for another round. Thank you to those of you who watched the Reform video. If you haven't watched it, I went to a Reform conference in Birmingham for 2 days, and I've given you the whole layout, the whole rundown. If you want to know anything and everything about it, I have tried to lay it out in that video. It's about half an hour. It's a longer video than I normally do, but it's because, hey, a lot happened in Birmingham. And actually, I think the thing about Reform Conference this year is I think it could be one of those conferences where people who were there in 25 years talk about it, because it really feels like that's a big moment in British political history. Possibly for the wrong reasons, but I won't comment on that here. Another quick piece of housekeeping. I'm getting a lot of requests to do bookshelf tours, shelfies. I will do that, I promise. I am on it. You don't need to leave any more comments. I got the message. I will be on that. That's coming soon. I will try and get to the first one this week. I've got a lot of books on my shelf, so I probably have to split it into different videos. But that is coming. But what we're here to talk about today is Ireland and possible far right, or trying to evaluate the far right threat, the possibility of the far right. I think, as I've commented on in other places, and other people have commented on, and it's just an interesting fact, is we have seen the rise of the far right throughout Europe, in tandem with the rise of the populist right, and I think that's a little bit different, but I will get to that later in the video. But we've seen a rise of a right wing that is further to the right than the traditional centre right, particularly in European terms, throughout Europe, but not really in Ireland, not in terms of at the ballot box, not in terms of as an electoral threat. And what I'm here today to talk about is that in response to, so what has triggered this is there was an article in the Irish Times about Simon Harris, the Tánaiste, so for English viewers, that's the Deputy Prime Minister, leader of Fine Gael. He has been repeatedly targeted by death threats towards himself and his family. There have been threats towards, through his family, bomb threats to his house in County Wicklow. And this has been going on for a bit. And this seems to be in tandem with far-right protesters at his residence as well. And the two are strongly suspected, as far as I can tell from what I've read, to be connected, although that's not 100% confirmed, but it looks extraordinarily likely. In other words, it looks like far-right activists are making these threats on Harris. So it makes you kind of wonder about that. The other thing is I've been watching, obviously, the emerging presidential race. For those who don't know, there's a presidential election in Ireland in November. And again, just to clear this up for British viewers who may not know, the Irish president is largely ceremonial. It doesn't have executive power. It's a little bit like what we have in the UK, except obviously the president's elected, as opposed to it being a bloodline hereditary monarchy. So, but basically the executive resides in the Dáil in the form of whoever has in the Taoiseach, the prime minister. So there's an election, and so this is actually interestingly timed in terms of where Ireland is, I think where Europe is, and the boxer Conor McGregor has emerged as a bizarre figure, in a sense, in this race. Bizarre in the sense that he seems to have made inroads with Trump, or at least the Trumpian right in America. He's getting he seems to be a figurehead within the sort of social media populist right. They like to post weird BS things about him, like he's going to win the presidential election by 60%. Actual fact, it looks like he will struggle mightily, very mightily, and it would be incredible if he overcomes this to just be on the ballot. So constitutionally, getting on the ballot to run as president in Ireland is a bit of a tricky matter. You need approval at several different levels. I won't go into them here. You either know it or you don't. If you don't, you can Google it. But it's difficult. You don't just rock up and say, "I'd like to run for president, please." And it looks very much like McGregor, who has no political hinterland, well, it's not like he's been in the Dáil or has any. As far as I know, he's never been an elected official in Ireland. You can correct me on that if I'm incorrect, but that's what I understand. And that makes it very difficult under the rules. But anyway, nonetheless, it's interesting because actually one of the things about the far-right populist right, again, I think they're two different things, and I'll come to that, in Ireland is that they haven't really had a figurehead. But I think the thing is, when I think about these things, is you could have someone who's really a charismatic leader of something, who's really brilliant, but if it doesn't have any sort of groundswell, if there's no people on the ground, or not enough anyway, who really care about something, then it doesn't matter how charismatic they are, there's only so far they're going to go. Whereas if you've got a movement that has enough of a groundswell, it should in theory be easier to find someone who at least just can confront that. Anyway, that's my thought. So in terms of it being a danger, but they haven't until this point had someone. Whether McGregor's serious enough to be that person, I gotta say I probably doubt it. I mean, maybe I'd love to know your views in the comments, but McGregor just seems, very politically lightweight. He put out a thing, and I know one doesn't want to be snobbish about any of these things, and I'm not saying someone needs to be a genius to be a politician. In fact, I think we're in an age where that's might be a disadvantage, but across the West. But nonetheless, he put out this tweet the other day that I assumed when I saw it was parody, and it was Conor McGregor. I think it was colon or that your president, right? But it wasn't your Y-O-U-R. It was your as in you are, Y-O apostrophe R-E, as in you are president, which doesn't make any actual sense unless you're trying to say, oh yeah, or something like, I can't remember. That's the thing. It was so nonsensical. I can't even remember what he actually put out. But anyway, it was grammatically weird and didn't make any sense. And I kind of think you should be able to use apostrophes if you want to be the president of a country. I don't feel like that's too snobbish of me. That's not too high an expectation. I don't think you need to be a genius about everything or be academic or even be particularly book smart. I could live with that, But I think you got to know how apostrophes work. Sorry. My 8-year-old kid knows how to use apostrophes entirely correctly. It's not that difficult. It's really not a high expectation. So I don't think he's serious enough to really be it. It's clear that he's not going to win the presidential election, or it seems extraordinarily unlikely to me from my vantage point. Could he win again in the future? Maybe, I guess. He's pushing for this thing, actually. He's pushing for a referendum to try and change the Constitution, as far as I can tell. I've tried to read his comments on it, and again, like most of his comments on politics, they feel sort of half-formed is really actually being entirely polite, kind of all over the place and a bit scrambled eggs and like what the hell is he talking about? But the inference seems to be can the Irish Constitution be changed so that the Irish president has executive power? That's what I'm kind of getting off what he's saying. It's a bit Trumpian in a way. Kind of a very, very, very poor man's Trump. In a sense of trying to say something, but it's all inferred and it's never direct because you want to have plausible deniability and say that isn't what I meant, which is the whole point of populist right communication that even Conor McGregor gets in this day and age. But I just think that okay, now's the time to really talk about populist right and far right, because I think this comes into it quite a lot. Because if we're going to talk about if Ireland has a far right issue, then I think we have to sort of define our terms. So, to me, how I would talk about the two, is to me, far right, if I'm going to call someone far right, yes, there needs to be something explicitly ethno-nationalist, explicitly. I don't mean inferred or it's kind of there, but they're kind of denying it. They think that Europe is for white people, essentially. And actually we should have as few white people or a few non-white people or no non-white people in Europe. And they feel that they will express that openly. And maybe they express it in kind of slightly less harsh but it kind of doesn't matter. You understand that it's explicitly racist, basically. That's what I'm trying to say about far right That's what I would say is far right. And I would also say that in that they probably will express some other views about authoritarianism, an idea that we probably can't really get what they can't really get what they want through the democratic system ultimately, and actually the democratic system is only there to facilitate getting their people into power, and then Hitler style essentially dismantling the mechanics of democracy. So that's what I think of as far right. Populist right is a bit more complex. I think populist right is, to me, populist right is essentially taking whatever you want from left and right, and oftentimes what that will mean is taking a lot of social stuff from the right, and really actually sometimes from the far right, but being very cagey about that, right? So you always want to, if you're being a populist right person, you always want to have plausible deniability in a way that a far right person wouldn't. So you always want to be, if someone says to you, do you think that white people should have more rights in European countries than black or brown people? A far right person will say yes. They'll just go, well, yes, and maybe they'll qualify it with something or whatever, but they'll say yes. A populist right person will say no, that isn't what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the fact that white people are being treated worse than black or brown people, and we want to have equivalence or whatever. That's the more populist right position, right? The idea that what you're trying to do with the populist right stuff is you're trying to reach a bigger audience, right? You're trying to... People will say dog whistle, and there's some of that. So what you're trying to say is, you might say things that you're hoping far-right people will kind of go, oh, wait, I got what you said there. While much more sort of normal, middle-of-the-road people will go, well, that sounds totally sensible. Yeah, we just want to get, we just don't want migrant hotels in the middle of poor British towns. Do people have a real issue with that? Clearly, this system hasn't worked. So the idea being that you're sort of speaking to the far-right audience in a dog whistle, like as in only they can hear it, and you are speaking to everybody else in a sort of reasonable fashion. So I think that's important. And the other thing is I think they're happy to take things from the left, very happy. In fact, they will ride certain horses that are very left-wing orientated to actually try and win over people who see themselves as left-wing voters. So I think that's populist right. Now, some of you might say there's no difference really, and I'm getting lost in semantics. But I don't think I am, and I actually think the designation is quite important. And I particularly think this pertains to Ireland, only because Ireland sort of is in a position where it can kind of save itself on this front in a way that is difficult for other Western European countries. So, given that you don't really have a populist... Ireland doesn't really have a... I'm just as if I'm talking to Irish people, and I know there's a lot of British and other people watching, so I should specify. I think the thing about Ireland is it doesn't have a Farage figure, not in the same way. It doesn't have a Le Pen figure. It doesn't have a populist right figure in the sense that I've talked about populist right. In other words... Maybe some far-right people will like what they want. Maybe some far-right people will say they don't go far enough, but actually they will get elected, so let's get behind it. But in essence, actually, the most important thing is so many people who might have voted for mainstream center-right or even center-left parties in very recent memory will vote for them. And there isn't a figure like that. There isn't a party like that in Ireland. So, in a sense, like the Liberals... people who don't want a rise of a populist or far right in Ireland can kind of get their ducks in a row a little bit and kind of think about what they want to do, because you're not facing down a sort of Irish Farage. You can say the closest you've got is McGregor, and he's a long way off Farage. I mean, just in every single way. One of the things that Farage has is 20 years of plowing a certain field. And I'm not saying he hasn't shifted on certain things or gone where the wind blows, but he's always been very smart in how he does that. And he has done it in a way which has preserved people's kind of idea of him as an authentic voice who is about things in a way that the rest of the political class in Britain just seems opportunistic and they will just blow with the wind. McGregor doesn't have that. I mean, he's obviously he's an athlete who is famous for being an athlete, and he's used that fame to kind of come along and try and do something. But I just sort of feel, I mean, maybe in Ireland you'll tell me it feels very different, and I'd love to hear from what you think. But my just general sense is that, like, he's not really bright enough or cagey enough or political enough to really be the person who changes this around in Ireland or marks a real shift. Because really what needs to happen, right, is there needs to be a sort of a Farage figure who would be capable of getting enough seats in the Dáil so that, actually, particularly given Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael's, the sort of the eroding of their grip on the electorate, right, where you're having more parties come into play. You're having Sinn Féin being much more of a play, getting more seats than they ever have done, and trying, and basically a sort of populist right party trying to position itself so that they are at least very difficult to get round, in terms of forming a government. And given you've got a PR system, all of that's possible. So something to look out for. I'd love to know what you think, particularly Irish viewers. Do you think that there will be a rise of a populist right party? There will be a further rise, maybe even a right wing party, like a sort of an Irish equivalent of the BNP, if any of you remember the BNP, British Nationalist Party, so an explicitly ethno-nationalist party. Or if that's just not going to happen. And also, if it's going to happen, do you think McGregor's going to be part of it, or do you think he's just too Conor McGregor, basically, to fulfill that role? Anyway, I wanted to keep this like short and tight, short and sweet. Please let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. Obviously, if you've got this far into the video, I would love a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel. It's what you try and do on YouTube. Really, is subscribers are so vital, and it doesn't cost you anything. You just have to click a thing that says subscribe, and it helps me a great deal. And if you've liked the video, that would be really wonderful. I'll be back with something soon, something that catches my eye. This one I just read something in the Irish Times, and that was it. I was away, and I got the idea. Again, I promise I will do Bookshelf very shortly. I really do. I guess I'm slightly scared, only in the sense of I don't care. You can see my books, and actually I'd love to talk about them, particularly given a lot of them aren't mine. I am a married man with 3 kids, and so I have a slightly insane bookshelf, but I would be happy to give you a tour. It's just, I don't know who, other than the hardcores who have asked for it several times, I don't know how many people would actually want to watch that, but I'll be on that, so don't worry. Thank you for watching, if you watched this far. My name is Nick Tyrone, Neoliberal Centrist Dad, and I'll be back with you soon.